Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is the first public input session to learn more about the forthcoming design guidelines for downtown Erie. I'm Emily Fetchko, acting CEO of the Erie Downtown Partnership, and we are a nonprofit partnering organization with the mission of making downtown safe, fun, and welcoming for all. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to get into this. We're going to go to the beginning. It's coming. We serve a 70-block footprint within the commercial core, designated as a downtown improvement district. We also hold a Main Street accreditation with the National Main Street Center and implement the Main Street 4-point approach, one of which focuses on the design of the built environment, along with safe, clean, and green, promotional, economic vitality, and design programming for transformational projects. Simply put, we are focused on the downtown experience for businesses, residents, employees, and visitors. Thank you, Frank. In 2016, we released the Downtown Master Plan in alignment with the city's Erie Refocused Comprehensive Plan. One of the 6 goals identified was the improvement of the physical environment. The Erie Downtown Partnership has had a long-standing design committee and has provided grant funding for facade improvements to property owners and businesses downtown since our establishment in 2004. Over these last 18 years, we've leveraged over $1 million in matching investment for safety, streetscape, and facade improvements. Our facade program alone has generated over $700,000 in facade grants to improve signage, replace or repair windows and doors, provide paint and masonry work, provide restoration and preservation work, and improve lighting. We anticipate more requests for facade improvement grants as we continue to work with property owners and business owners and their tenants to improve the built environment. Just last year alone, 145 building permits were pulled from the city of Erie. That is a total value of over $104 million just from those permits alone. Buildings are an important and evolving part of the downtown experience. But so are the people. And that's why you're here today. As people who use and move through downtown, as investors who own and maintain property, as developers and contractors who are renovating buildings, we're building downtown together. Your input today, as we move through this process, is very important to us, and we're glad you're here. We've been pursuing the creation of downtown design guidelines for a while, several years actually, and we're excited to have this initiative moving forward. We especially are excited to use the guidelines to maximize the efforts of our facade improvement grant, as well as to celebrate and honor the architecture of State Street, to provide guidance on meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards of historic properties, to guide sensitive new construction and new developments within historic areas, to encourage quality investments and improvement in our historic buildings for a vibrant downtown, to advise on trends of deterioration and mitigation recommendations, to provide a consistent look and feel to the downtown central business district, to maximize the efforts of our facade reimbursement grant program and the Neighborhood Assistance Program Enterprise Zone and the Historic Preservation Tax Credits. In closing, my sincere thanks and appreciation to our Design Guidelines Advisory Committee, who continue to champion this project and bring so much experience and insight into this work. They have been an extraordinary group of individuals to work with, and they are Kathy Rosdeck, Chris Kinder, Melinda Meyer, Emily Alloys, William Callahan, David Brennan, Jeff Kidder, and Abby Watson Papaskew. We also want to acknowledge our funders for this project. We received generously from the Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority and the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office funding specifically for this project. And we're really excited that you're here with us this evening. I'm now delighted to turn the presentation over to Lauren Burge of Prospectus, who is the firm facilitating this process with us and who will be developing the guidelines with your input. Thank you so much. Lauren?
Thank you, Emily. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to take my mask off, so if anybody needs to see my lips in order to understand me, that's always helpful. I'm really delighted to be here tonight, and I really want to thank all of you for joining us in person and everybody who's joining us virtually via Zoom. As Emily said, I'm Lauren Burge. I'm a registered architect, principal with Prospectus, and I am leading the team that is doing the work for developing the design guidelines for downtown Erie. The photos that you see here are the rest of the team from our office: Alice Sloan, Elizabeth Murphy, who's also a principal, Olivia Zepp, and Polly Bloom. And they are all joining us via the Zoom call, so they are all out there in cyberspace somewhere. And not pictured and not with us is Natalie Otta, who's also part of the team. She's our graphic designer. This is our schedule for the project. We are here in a little red triangle. It is March 10th, 2022, and this is public meeting number 1. And we titled this meeting Celebrate Erie, because really what we're going to talk about tonight is what great architectural resources and historic resources you have here in your downtown. And then we really would like to get some input from you. So towards the end of this session, we're going to have some questions for you. And then we're going to open up for questions from you. And Emily and I and Melinda will try and answer them. So up to this date, we've been doing our historic research, learning ourselves about Erie and its architecture and its history. We've been surveying our study area, taking photographs, looking through documentation that's available on the historic structures within the study area, and getting ready to start writing. So after tonight's meeting, we'll take your input, we'll do our writing and our editing and our graphics, and then we'll come back in May 2022 for public meeting number 2, and we hope you'll join us again and review the document, as it'll be a pretty complete draft. Give us comments on that document, and then we'll take those comments and we'll do our final revisions, get ready for adoption, and then we're going to be conducting some workshops on how to use the guidelines. And then our goal is to be wrapped up by July 30th, 2022. So this is the study area. It is focused on State Street, and it runs from Bayfront Parkway to 14th Street. So all the buildings that you see here highlighted in red are the ones that we are looking at in our assessment and survey. That does not mean that the guidelines will not be usable or applicable for property owners to use as a resource for buildings outside of this study area. It's just for us to kind of concentrate on a single area makes it a little more manageable in terms of just getting a flavor of the downtown. So one of the reasons we're also focused on State Street is you see the buildings that have a little turquoise circle with a star in it. That is a great concentration of buildings that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So these are buildings that are already recognized as being historically important. Then the blue line that you see is a proposed Lower State Street National Register Historic District, which was determined eligible in 2006. It is not yet listed, but it has been evaluated by the state and determined eligible. So these are some of the key concepts that we look at with design guidelines and how they are different from an ordinance. So typically a guideline is non-binding, and it's used to illustrate best practices. It's often a companion document to an ordinance that is binding, but because ordinances are written in legal language and there's no pictures, we find it's easier for people to have guidelines as a companion document. Guidelines always follow the national standards, but they're often tailored to a particular community. So what is the right guidelines for Erie might be a little different for a different city with different styles of architecture present, and also would be different for a downtown area than it would be for a residential area or a rural area. Design guidelines are typically a working tool for a historic review commission, and it helps the members of that commission interpret the ordinance and when they're reviewing projects. Then on the other side of the table, the design guidelines help illustrate an ordinance for property owners so that that historic review process is a little less daunting because they have something illustrated and more understandable and examples. Then guidelines, because they're not binding, they can be easily updated. And we'll talk about why we would update guidelines a little later. Key benefits of historic preservation. So I want to give you some of these kind of big, intuitive ideas. These are all backed up by many, 50 years of data, and we'll give you those resources to find that data in the guidelines. But just to kind of give you some overall big ideas, communities that have and strongly value historic preservation tend to have higher property values and retain those property values when there are market fluctuations. So they tend to stay more stable. Downtown areas with strong historic preservation practices tend to have increased traffic, business traffic. Customers want to shop, dine, do business, hang out in a place that's meaningful, beautiful, well-kept. Third one, people love history. They are most interested in history that they're connected to. So their own community, their own buildings, their own families, they spend time and they spend money pursuing that history. And then finally, there are economic incentives for historic preservation that can be a great tool for Erie. And these include the historic preservation state and federal tax credits, block grant funds, American Rescue Funds. Private foundations, when offering grants, sometimes will favor a building that includes historic preservation. And then Emily did talk about the Erie Downtown Facade grants. And I love this slide and the pictures on this slide because it's such a great illustration of what we mean by an authentic historic downtown. And the upper picture is somebody's attempt at creating a new building that kind of looks like a bunch of old buildings. And then the bottom picture is, and these are extreme examples, is just a beautiful, exuberant, historic downtown group of buildings. And the idea here is that historic looking is not historic. History is the buildup of events over time. So designating your building didn't make it historic. History made it historic. It is historic because it's just here. And people do recognize things that are authentic and value them. So this is our proposed table of contents for the design guidelines, and I won't go through every single one of these items. I'll just highlight a couple of them. The guidelines will definitely have a brief, maybe just a couple pages, history of Erie and Erie's downtown, and this will start with pre-European settlement, talking about why Erie is here, the Presque Isle Bay, the shipbuilding, the Battle of Lake Erie, how important Erie is so that people have a ready, oh yeah, that's why we're here. I forgot why we're here. It'll look at the growth of the community during the industrial age and all the way into the modern age. So it'll have a brief timeline history just as a quick resource for people. It'll have general preservation philosophy based on the national standards. And then it'll have guidelines for changes, guidelines for new construction, guidelines for adding maybe site features, signage, solar panels, satellite dishes, those kinds of things. We'll talk about those. It'll talk about code compliance and accommodating people with disabilities. It'll talk about maintaining your historic building and the right way to do things and helpful information for property owners. And then in the back of it, it will have a bibliography with all the resources, definitions, glossary, and where you can find all kinds of good information beyond what we're going to put together in this document. And so the next thing I want to do is talk about Erie architecture. And I'm not going to get into every single one of these in a great depth of detail, but I want to give you a flavor of what's going to be in the guidelines and how it's going to be specific to Erie. Erie has an incredible timeline of architecture just on State Street. It's quite lengthy. So it starts with this building, which is the main building in the foreground. The little Greek temple-looking building is the U.S. Customs House, and it was started construction in 1839, finished in 1838, sorry, and finished in 1839. It was designed by architect William Kelly of Philadelphia, and it was early listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and I want to kind of give you a flavor of why that's so impressive. That this National Register listing was nominated in 1971, and the National Register was brand new then. They were just getting started with it. It was brand new legislation. It was a brand new survey, and the states were charged by the federal government with identifying their most important buildings. So this is one of the first buildings nominated to the National Register in the state of Pennsylvania. That's how important this building is. And then the guidelines will talk about what influenced each style and how to identify one style from the other. So why does this building look like a little Greek temple? Well, think about when this building was built. We're a pretty new republic. And architects of this time period were really rejecting those English styles. The War of 1812 was in living memory from when this building was built. We wanted to get away from all those English European. We wanted something that represented us, our republic, our new republic. So we looked at Roman and Greek architecture as our models, and these were very popular styles. They represented our values. The building that's just to the side, the little similar color building, is the Cashier's house. It was built the same 1839, so it was affiliated. It is listed as a Greek Revival building, but it also, I think, has elements of federal style. And from the National Register listing, it says it has a Egyptian Revival interior, which is really unique and very impressive. So the district also has the buildings from the middle of the 19th century, a lot of Italianate buildings, really distinguished by hood molds and decorative metalwork. And then it has some things from the late 19th century, Queen Anne style and Romanesque Revival style. And then rolling into the beginning, the very beginning of the 20th century, holdovers of the Queen Anne a little bit, but also we're starting to see influence of the American arts and crafts movement, which was starting to become a little more focused on crafted details, a very different aesthetic. And then also we saw some European influences coming back in as soldiers returning from World War I. Theater in Europe started bringing those romantic European styles back into vogue. Then we have things that are getting to be about the second quarter of the 20th century, so we're talking 1920s, 30s, 40s, pushing into 1950. We're seeing a lot of Renaissance Revival and a lot of Art Deco. All three of these buildings are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then we get into the middle of the 20th century, starting to get like late 30s, 40s, 50s. And we start seeing what we call modern movement. So these are much more streamlined architecture. These are the beginning of modern architecture. And you can see this is the old Woolworth store and the historic postcard. And more examples of that modern architecture. And then mid-century, which we are getting to the point where mid-century is, we're there. Mid-century is now historic. Anything 50 years and over. So things built in the 60s and even into the 70s we're looking at now, and we're studying for their value as historic buildings. So we have a couple styles here, the international style, and then we also see brutalism. And I want to talk about brutalism. It's not a negative connotation. That term brutalism comes from a French term meaning en brut, which means in the raw. And architects at that time were looking at their materials that they were using for structure and building, and they just wanted to show them as they were, plain and simple. So when you had a concrete structural building, they left the concrete exposed. So you see a lot of exposed concrete buildings in that brutalism mode, en brut. And then I won't show this as my kind of last slide. We're pushing into the edge of our 50-year limits, and we still want to look at these buildings. And the reason is we tend to lose our historic buildings sometime between when they're 30 years old and 50 years old. Because after they're 50 years old, we start to think, oh, these are cool. It's when they're 30 to 50 years old that we really lose a lot of them. So we really want to start studying these for the next decade, because we want these guidelines to remain relevant, but we're probably going to be adding styles as these guidelines develop. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Melinda, and she's going to talk about the ordinance and the Historic Review Commission, and I'm going to come back and ask you some questions.
Hello. It's been a long time since I talked in front of a group of people. I noticed the other day that my voice is not trained to speak for longer than 15, 20 minutes at a time. For my husband, this is fantastic, right? It's 2 years at home. He's comfortable with me being short. But in any case, so they've given me about 5 minutes to talk about the Historic Review Commission, and this is really a great time. So first of all, my name is Melinda Meyer. I should start with that. My name is Melinda. I represent both Preservation Erie and the City of Erie's Historic Review Commission. This is a great opportunity to talk with you a little bit about the Historic Review Commission because of the fact that the development of these design guidelines by the Erie Downtown Partnership is really complementary to the work that the city is doing to build a historic preservation program. Back in 2019, the mayor and city council came together and voted to create what was then called the Historic Preservation Task Force. This task force was a small group of people tasked with studying kind of the historic preservation issues at the city and looking at ways in which historic preservation could be connected to broader economic development strategies. So we were given 2 years to kind of look at what the city should do next with regards to historic preservation. So out of that came a report. I'm not going to rattle off everything in the report. I would recommend, if you're interested in reading it, it is available through the city's website. But ultimately what we decided was important for the city in embracing historic preservation, again, as an economic development tool, is pursuing certified local government designation, and one of the main action steps in pursuing the certified local government designation was updating an existing ordinance within the city's zoning. And I won't switch the slide just yet, because why is certified local government designation important, and why is it an important step for the city? The Certified Local Government Program is actually a national program. It's managed by the National Park Service. At the state level, it's managed by the State Historic Preservation Office. And becoming a certified local government gains the community access to technical assistance around historic preservation issues and access to money. It's usually the second one that makes people excited, right? So in pursuing and gaining the certified local government designation, we have now become or have gained access to a pot of money that is limited only to certified local governments. And that pool of funding can be used to do survey work, support trainings, support a lot of different types of historic preservation programs. Also, an outcome of the task force's work, which was led with the Erie County Department of, sorry, that's my job, the Erie City Department of Planning. Sorry about that, Kathy. So the Erie City Department of Planning really led work with the Historic Preservation Task Force, and it was important as the city ramps up its historic preservation program to have staff at the city with special knowledge and skills around historic preservation. And so the city now has its very first historic preservation planner. Meet Chris Kinder. I told him I was thankful he was wearing yellow tonight. We can very easily point him out. So Chris is our historic preservation planner at the city. Chris has experience working with several state historic preservation offices, has experience with National Register nominations, just brings a vast knowledge to the community. So also out of this, as I mentioned earlier, was an update of an ordinance within the zoning handbook. This is Article 7 of the zoning handbook, and we're not going to dive too deep into this because I'd like for all of you to stay awake for the next question and answer period. So the ordinance that was updated, again, it was an existing ordinance. It was the ordinance that was specifically tailored to address the ongoing care and preservation of historic resources in the city. It just needed some updating. Through the update, it created a permanent commission within the city that would look at historic preservation issues. This is the Historic Review Commission. So this commission has been meeting now for about half a year, I believe so, if I've got that right, and we meet monthly. So the role of the Historic Review Commission is first and foremost to celebrate the history and historic places of the community. It's also the role of the Historic Review Commission to connect historic preservation to, again, economic development, connect historic properties and the people who own them with state and federal resources to support the ongoing care of those buildings. It's also the role of the Historic Review Commission to work in partnership with the city's Planning Commission and City Council to designate local historic landmarks and historic districts. So there's a lot of work that is part of the responsibility of the Historic Review Commission. If you would like to read Article 7, it is available through the city's website. You can pull up the zoning handbook. However, if you just want to see what the Historic Review Commission is up to, what I would recommend is going to the homepage of the city website, and directly from the homepage, you can actually find a link to the Historic Review Commission, where you can find a copy of the bylaws, meeting minutes, and all sorts of information about what we're up to. I would also encourage you, if you're interested, to attend one of our meetings. We meet monthly, and right now they are hybrid meetings, and we're having conversations about creating the historic preservation program at the City of Erie. So these are very foundational, strategic level conversations that we're having, and we encourage the community to participate. So again, we meet monthly, and they're hybrid, so you don't necessarily have to come and sit in these seats. And I think I think I've covered everything that I was supposed to cover. Chris, is there anything else that you'd like for me to mention? Oh, thank you. This is what happens when you don't bring notes. So yes, what is the Historic Review Commission? What are some of our first significant or large-scale projects on the horizon? So first and foremost is development of a historic preservation plan for the city. This will really guide where the historic preservation program goes for the next 3 to 5 years. There will be lots of opportunities for the public to engage in that conversation, and we hope that if you're here, you do indeed have an interest in historic properties, which means you're going to want to participate in a planning project that encompasses the city. The other thing that we have coming up that we're just now soliciting funding for is a citywide historic resource survey. Back in 2014, Preservation Erie, we actually did fund a county-wide historic resource inventory. It was an updating of the 1982 inventory that was done, and I know I'm talking inventories, and you're like, oh gosh, please not anymore. But inventories, I promise, it is interesting. The inventory actually documents our historic resources. Which ones could potentially be eligible for listing on the National Register, whether they're individual buildings or groupings of buildings, which is what we refer to as a historic district. So the 2014 update of the 1982 inventory missed a whole slew of buildings that were not accounted for in 1982. So it's really exciting that the second big project is on the horizon, which again is a citywide inventory to really look at what are our most important historic resources. And again, both will involve community engagement. Now have I hit all the high points? All right, I get the thumbs up. So I'm going to step off, give it back to Lauren and Emily, and Q&A.
So we are making good time tonight, and we have a good 20 minutes left of our hour. So what we're going to do now is both here in this room and online, we have a poll for these first two questions. And we're going to ask you three questions. We're going to ask you three questions, three questions, and then we'll open it up for you to ask questions of us. So our first question, so that's the online poll, and I'm going to scroll. Is it? Okay. I'm going to let technology take care of things. So Emily talked about in the beginning, Emily talked about the goals that were initially set when Erie Downtown Partnership was looking for a firm to come and do the design guidelines. They set goals for the design guidelines. So this is a list of those goals, and what I want you to do, so this is question 1. I want you to tell me which one, so you're going to say 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, so on and so forth. Which one of these is the most important to you? So I'm going to read them off. So the first is to celebrate and honor the architecture of State Street. The second one, B, is guidance on best practices for design changes to historic properties. C is guidance on sensitive new construction and new development within historic areas. 1D is encouragement of quality investments and improvements in historic buildings for a vibrant downtown. 1E is advice on maintenance of historic properties. Yes, I think I can. There we go. Is that better? Something's in the way? Is that better?
I don't know if I can make it anything but
Can I?
this is as big as it gets.
Okay. I will try and Read it, and if you can't see it, I have a paper copy. Hang on a second. And one paper copy. Oh, you got it? Is it legible? Oh, great. All right. Okay. So what number are we on? I think it was advice on maintenance. Was E, advice on maintenance of historic properties? F, achievement of a consistent look and feel to downtown central business district? G, maximize the efforts of facade reimbursement grant program and neighborhood assistance enterprise zone program and historic tax credits? And then H, which is the last, is fill in the blank. Pick something other. And I think you can probably put, if you're online, you can write it in the chat comments for question 1. So just on your card, you can write 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, whatever is the most important to you. Well, did we roll up to number 2? That's okay. So we'll give you a couple minutes. You're doing great. Give you a minute or so more. There's 3. There's only 3. All right, is everybody ready to go on to question 2? Okay. So, question 2. So, this list is all of the things that we said were going to be in the table of contents, so things we're going to actually address in the design guidelines. And what I'd like you to do is pick the one thing in this list that you think is the most pressing challenge, the most important thing for us to address. So weigh in on which one of these is the most important. So I'll read them off again. So these will be 2A, 2B, 2C. Just pick one. And again, the last one is, fill in the blank. You can throw something in if I forgot something. Lauren, you didn't think about this at all. So 2A is changes to historic buildings by feature. So that's changes in design to the historic buildings by feature. B would be new construction in historic districts. C, site features, historic and new. D is signage. Do we have a signage problem? F, application of Americans with Disabilities Act. Is that a particular challenge? G, general maintenance and repairs of historic buildings. H, demolition and moving. I, resources for help. Is that the most important thing to get people? Where to find resources? And J is fill in the blank. So again, I'll give you a couple minutes. So far online, it looks pretty even. Wait until it gets to 80%. We'll assume that the rest of the people are just watching and don't want to vote. Might be my staff, rest of our team.
We're at 100 for question 2, 76 for question 1.
Okay. Does anybody need to see question 1 again online? I don't know if that's a...
They're up at the same time. So
Okay.
22. But that's a lot of my items.
Okay. And at least one of those is, and I know at least one of our project team is on. I think they're all on, but no one's texted me to say, you stunk. Terrible job presenting. All right, so let's wrap up the poll. And then I think the last question, the third question, is just to fill in the blank, right? Yeah. So what we're going to do is, if you are online watching, we are going to have you just type in the chat your answer. And then those of you here, all you're going to do is write your answer on your card to question 3. So what I think I'm going to do, Frank, can I get back to my PowerPoint? Can I minimize? Okay. There we go. Okay. I got question 3 shown. We still want the chat open though.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so question 3 is pretty simple. I want you to tell me, where do you like to go and spend time and money? And if you can, name a city rather than, local bar. Name a town, a place that you like to go and spend time and money. So those of you who are here can just write it on your card. Those of you who are online can just put it in the chat. And we have a couple chats. And when we come back in May, we'll look at what you all said. Anybody want to share the name of the city they picked? Besides Erie. Erie doesn't count. I know Erie is your favorite place to spend time and money. I'm sorry.
We have Cleveland, Ohio, Buffalo, Dayton, Ohio, New York City, Pittsburgh, and a repeat of Cleveland, Pittsburgh as well.
Okay.
Coming in from the chat, DC.
Anybody want to share what they picked? Philadelphia. Can chat them out. New Hope, Pennsylvania. I'm a big fan of New Orleans. Oh, okay.
So on Facebook, Chicago. I don't have a microphone.
I can hear you. Chicago was one. So it looks we have maybe 10 coming online. That's pretty. city's named. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left, so we're going to open things up for questions. So Emily's here if you want to ask her a question. Melinda's here, and I'm happy to answer questions as well. So, yes, please, thank you. Yes, please, thank you. Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Emily. So you had a question, would you? So, okay. Okay, so I'm going to repeat your question. The question was about what happened in the process when the Greyhound terminal was demolished or determined? Okay, it didn't qualify as historic. Okay, so what happened there, and I may not be able to answer that because I haven't been around long enough, but possibly somebody else could. And then the second question was about adding lighting, uplighting, or controlling how much uplighting is on buildings. And that is something certainly could be put into the other category. So I will answer that. That is something we can put in the other category for the design guidelines, is to talk about exterior lighting. And we definitely will have a section in there about appropriate exterior lighting for historic buildings. So I don't know if anybody can address the... And then maybe we'll take a question from somebody online, if there's any.
And so the Greyhound bus terminal was a contributing resource to the proposed National Register District, the Lower State Street National Register District. So it was considered a historic property with regards to, again, it being a contributing resource to that potential National Register District. The Erie Downtown Development Corporation was well within their rights to demolish that building. Currently the demolition of historic structures is not regulated. So the way to regulate those types of activities is through ordinance. So I think part of that is what will be discussed through the work of the Historic Review Commission. But as far as the demolition of that resource, the property owner did what they were legally able to do and capable of doing.
Oh, wow. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to answer that because I'm not far enough in there. If the community has historic images, like you have a picture in your attic of downtown, that would be incredibly valuable to us because it would really help us understand the changes that have been made to the existing buildings. So that kind of thing would be extraordinarily helpful. I will say one thing about to just kind of explain to everybody about the difference between a local landmark and a National Register listing. A National Register listing is an honor. It carries no regulatory requirements at all, except if there is a federal license or a federal grant or federal loan, then it has to be reviewed for compliance with the national standards. And that technically doesn't necessarily mean that the building can't be torn down, but typically you cannot use federal money to tear that building down. But the private property owner does have a right to, even if it's National Register listed, does have a right to tear down their building. There's really no restrictions with that designation contributing to a National Register district. It's only really local ordinances that have a little more teeth to them. So do we have a question from somebody online?
The only question was to repeat with the last audience.
Okay, which I hope I did. So he asked what the community can do to contribute to the development of the guidelines, and one of the things that we would love is, if you have them, is any historic images of the downtown. I'm gonna defer that to Emily. Is there some things that we definitely can?
Sure. How refreshing to be asked what you need. Well, I think, you know, her reference about historic reference and photos is great, but I think as far as manpower, it's really about mobilizing the community. We need more people at meetings, more people giving input, and I think just this overall awareness and energy around what we're trying to do. Because for the downtown partnership, I mean, certainly we can't do it without community. So I think influencers and people that can help mobilize the community and bring new energy. I love seeing who I'm seeing here. This is a really great audience, and I'd love to see more of that fortified. And just a shout out to everybody online too. Thank you each for your time. But we'll definitely connect after too. Okay? Thank you so much.
We're probably running low on time. Let me check here real quick. It is 8:01. Do we want to take one more question? Anybody have a burning question they got to have answered tonight? Yeah. Oh. Okay. Okay, that just for people who maybe can't hear it online, that was just generally a comment that one of the greatest needs here is capital investment, and a concern that adding layers regulatory layers might be disincentives, but really it is important to hear that and to understand that the guidelines do have in them, you know, what historic tax credits are all about, how those are used to leverage investment and make those dollars go further and to encourage more investment and provide those incentives. So you had one question? There's not going to be anything in the guidelines that is going to talk about whether it's a local business or a chain business. It's more, that's a little more of a purview, I believe, under the Main Street program. So that's, am I correct? And so that's where a lot of that is going to happen. Really encouraging more local business, more local entrepreneurs in downtown, more unique offerings in the downtown. So one last one. So the guidelines aren't going to really address a lot of those things, but it's still important, and I appreciate that you're telling us these things because we want to hear it, and I think Emily can probably talk about other incentives and other things going on or other programs that might be able to address those.
Yeah, there's one exciting project that we hope to begin this year, which is our Energized and Engaged Public Spaces project. And one of the public spaces we'd like to look at is Griswold Park and that surrounding area. What kind of infrastructure, amenities, and programming, which Erie Downtown Partnership has the auxiliary programs and services to provide that, what can we do to leverage that public space opportunity and use that to connect that corridor more into the thoroughfare of State Street and really build that up. So I'd love to connect with you after this because you're not wrong. There's all those things going on too, and we're aware of them, and we'd like to be a part of the solution by applying a placemaking approach to that. So we'll definitely loop you in as we get going, but we'll talk before that. You had somebody online.
Yeah, two things online. So Constance Ratcliffe asked if the Design Guidelines Advisory Committee can make suggestions to identify and remove statues that are offensive to past historic references near the downtown area. Is that something that we've done in other cities or have seen done through guidelines before?
We have not, and we're not usually looking at elements that are other than architecture, so that probably wouldn't be something that we would address, but that's certainly something to bring up within the city and other.
I was going to say, I think that's a great issue for the Historic Review Commission to tackle. There is the potential to have monuments and statues in downtown Erie that are offensive, and it is something that I think the Historic Review Commission could participate in, and I would encourage whomever reached out via comment to reach out to the Historic Review Commission. Our contact information, Chris Kinder's contact information is on the website, and I think those types of discussions I think are perfect for the commission to help address.
Yep, and another somewhat related, just a comment from Michelle Pike. Please consider posting land acknowledgements recognizing traditional lands of indigenous people, whether it's through the historic like facade signs or
We are not currently working on that, but again, I think, that's another issue that the Historic Review Commission could certainly discuss, because I think all of those are great points.
Well, it's 8:10, everyone. We're not going to keep you any longer than you need to be here, but we are available after. If you have any questions or follow-up suggestions, feel free to email and reach out. We're so appreciative of your time and your input. Thank you ever so much, and have a wonderful evening.